Do you know someone who's had a medical device implanted into their bodies surgically, like a pacemaker or a knee replacement or a hip replacement? Well, the chances are we probably all know one person who's been a customer of this billion-dollar industry in India alone. India is in fact the fourth largest medical devices market in the world, and this market is expected to grow to $50 billion by 2025. Now, an investigation that's been conducted by the International Consortium of International Journalists, the ICIJ. Remember, this is the same group who brought us the Panama Papers and other such investigations before that. This includes the Indian Express in India. They brought to light some serious reasons to worry about the medical implants industry, especially if you're a patient. Here's what's been discovered in India in this investigation. To begin with, India doesn't have a separate policy for medical implants. The implants are regulated in the same policy and by the same regulator that looks at medical devices. So that clubs together instruments, apparatus, appliance, software, material. Fundamentally, a syringe is in the same category as a pacemaker that goes in your heart. Now, we lack, from what we understand, regulation on clinical testing, on how well each of these products and various brands perform, what their success rate is. There's a lack of regulation on pricing and the margins of the companies that manufacture these products. Now listen to this. Nearly half the products that are being implanted into Indian bodies are second-hand, or they're being reused, and there isn't enough information being shared with customers or patients. There's no quality control. There's no accountability to patients in terms of information that is shared before and after the surgery, and the steps that need to be taken in case the implant fails or is being recalled. In fact, the regulator doesn't even make public details of devices that are being recalled. And the most important question that we must ask at this point is the lack of a bill. Now, there was a bill that was related to medical devices that was drafted 12 years ago and has not been passed in India. Now, this investigation has looked at 1,500 public record requests, 8 million device-related records, and several other legal documents to come up with a massive global investigation. But the question I'm going to ask tonight is a fairly simple one. Are we really safe in India when it comes to implants? And remember, implants are pacemakers, knee replacements, hip replacements, catheters, anything that goes into your body and stays there. If we are not being regulated and there's no regulator specifically looking at these things, are we safe? Joining me on the show today, Murli Neelkantan is a lawyer experienced with the healthcare sector. Vijay Anand is a victim of one such implant. Ritu Sareen is the executive editor and the head of investigation at the Indian Express. She headed, in fact, for the Indian Express this particular investigation. Malini Asola is with the All India Drugs Network. Tina Sharma, spokesperson of the BJP. KK Agarwal, former president of the Indian Medical Association representing the doctors. I welcome all of you to this conversation and I thank you for giving us your time. I'm going to just ask the same question really that I started the show with. Murli, I'll start with you. Are we safe? Because when we went over the information that the newspaper put on its front page this morning, the thing that worried me most of all is that if there's such a serious lack of regulation, then who's looking after us?
Well, Faye, we've done this before with the hip implants. Clearly, we're not safe. Regulations can exist or not exist. But the proof of the pudding, strangely put, is in the eating. So if clearly devices have failed, patients have been hurt, patients have died, then clearly we are not safe. So it's a fairly simple question to answer. No, we are not safe. We're not safe.
Ms. Sareen, executive editor, head of investigations at the Indian Express. I know it took a fairly long time for you to get through this entire investigation. But if we look at basically just the regulation, because that's the first piece that you've sort of released today, what for you was the most worrying bit in this entire discovery?
Faye, just want to tell you that our series has just begun and it's only day one. We expect to go on for about a week. And since this is a global investigation, you know, the deadlines and the roll call is also decided internationally. So like today, all over the world, all the partners, that's about 250 journalists, ran with the story on Medtronics. And today, as we have put out, for tomorrow, we'll be running the story on breast implants. So the point I'm making is we've just begun, and please don't draw any conclusions from our series because it has to play out yet.
Okay. But Mr. In, I'm just going to ask you a follow-up question. Your front page did say, of course, that there is a serious lack of regulation in the country, which is public information, which we looked at as well. We've talked about it in the past. For someone going in for an implant at this point, how worrying should the lack of regulation be?
See, there is little or no regulation as we talk today. And as of now, there are 23 medical devices which are on the notified list. So the new medical device rules which have been enacted or which have come into effect on the 1st of January of this year affect only those 23 devices. Now, another list of devices have been put out by the CDSCO, which is the main regulator in India. And in that list, there are implants, but it does not specify which implants. So that has been given for comments to the public and to stakeholders. And so as we speak, implants are not a notified medical device in the country.
Implants are not notified medical devices in the country.
The other point I would like to make is...
Yes, please go on.
Yeah.
Ritu Sareen, go on, please.
No, the other point I was trying to make is that successive governments have tried to legislate a separate bill for medical devices. The last government did not do it, could not do it, and so far neither has this government, though a GOM was set up to do it. What I heard is that it was found to be too cumbersome, and you know, there are thousands of medical devices listing technology, and instead this government decided to bring in the medical device regulation rules and regulations. So that is the step we have forward in the beginning of this year, but no bill.
Yes, so the medical devices rules and regulation, but no bill. I want to bring Vijay into the conversation at this point. Vijay, you've had specific problems with a hip implant. And did you find regulation or government or any of that helpful in any way with your hip implant? Can you tell us what happened?
See, 2008 when I got my first hip replacement, it was doing well for the first, say about a few months. But then when it started off with the multiple problems, and neither the doctor told me, neither the regulators broadcasted anything, neither the company, nobody. There was no source of information available anywhere, unless and until when I happened to be there in one of the conference, an orthopedic conference, where I got across with a few doctors, and then they saw and told me like this is something which is recalled. And I have been constantly pursuing this matter from 2011, 12, 13 kind of things. But it's very hard, hardly ever any responses were given by the drug controllers. On the contrary, many a times when I used to write my emails used to be forwarded to the company, and they used to ask them the explanation, like, you know, what is this happening and why. So in one of the time, I think they mistakenly, they sent me a CC also on that. So that was quite shocking. And then I happened to ask the then drug controller, why are you forwarding me my emails to them? And if it is a part of your protocol, then you must send me the response also from the company side, which they miserably failed to respond to that. And not only that, even in the last 3 months, whatever letters, correspondence we have done, there is no communication happening from the government side or from the regulators. We don't know which world the regulators are living in.
Well, could it possibly be that basically the government just hasn't gotten around to regulating this industry, or a $5 billion industry is too big to be ignored? It can't be just...
The answer to that question actually came from a former health secretary, Sujata Rao, who said she made great efforts but failed in getting regulation for medical devices. I think, what else can I say? I mean, you've heard it from the horse's mouth. So, it is possible, it should be done, But it's not an Indian problem. There is a quote from the ICIJ which put out one of the members of European Parliament saying that the medical devices lobby is greater than the arms lobby and the oil lobby and the tobacco lobby. So you can gauge the size of how big the industry is, how powerful it is, and therefore its impact on bureaucrats.
Let me bring in the rest of my panel. K.K. Agarwal, former president of the IMA. Dr. Agarwal, I beg your pardon. There's been a fair amount of criticism of doctors as well in all of this. That doctors receive junkets, they receive kickbacks, there are accusations of corruption, and which is why doctors also perhaps withhold information. Do you agree that none of this perhaps would have been possible unless doctors were in some way enabling these medical device companies?
Absolutely.
See, at IMA, we are very clear that all medical devices, disposable reagents and machineries should be regulated, should come under two lists, whether it is an essential list and a non-essential list. That's number one. And transparency needs to be maintained. Unless you bring them under regulation, these types of allegations will keep on occurring that there is an access between a doctor and the patient, because the price regulation will not come. Unless you have a price regulation, the companies will be able to sell anything, and when the companies sell anything, and there will always be a possibility of an interaction between a doctor and a company. Therefore, it is very important, and we have been asking for it, that all devices should be divided into national list of essential devices and non-essential devices.
Only price.
Yes, go ahead.
That's only for price. I don't think this issue is only about price.
What specifically is this issue about then?
It's about standards. It's about efficacy. The standards we apply to drugs, simple things like paracetamol. There's quite a well-established system of whether a drug is safe.
So what you're saying is, let's take a knee replacement, for example.
Yes.
A lot of times, the patient doesn't know which company this knee replacement is coming from. They don't know whether that particular implant has been tested clinically, what is the success rate, how many of these have been used across the country, how many of the people who've had this particular device implanted into their bodies have been pain-free, how many of them have faced side effects. We don't know any of this.
Many of them don't even know which brand of implant is inside them. So whether you take stents or hip implants or knee implants, if you ask a patient, they won't even know. So they don't have a choice. You can't say there is an informed choice by the patient. There isn't.
Yes.
He can't even ask the doctor intelligent questions because he has no basis to understand it.
Yes.
So the question is not only about price. If he's told X, Y, Z and the price differential is very high, he's going to ask the doctor, which one do you recommend? Which one can I afford?
So
and that's
is
the
the argument here that unless we bring in stringent regulations, we can't trust the doctors to just tell us the truth?
Trust but verify. How can I start to trust you unless I have some verified information? So far, the doctors have failed us on trust, whether it's drugs or devices. They failed us.
There is no specific basis on which we trust or we don't distrust. There's a trust or not. How do you identify? The moment you go to the doctor, you're in very big pain, and you are under a big phobia. Like, what is going to happen to me after this? So whatever doctor says, those words are simply accepted, and it is very well established fact. Like, whatever your doctor says, you have to accept it, and there is no second opinion being taken. Nowadays, the young generations are adopting for second and third and fourth opinion, but whatever damages have happened, that is irreplaceable.
Dr. Sanjay Nagral joins us as well. Dr. Nagral, do you agree there is a serious lack of regulation, and do you believe that doctors at this point need to be regulated to share information with patients?
Thought say that communicating with the patient, sharing information is the basic thing that a doctor should be doing. I mean, you don't need regulation. But I think what's happening is that the ability of an individual doctor to think independent of the forces around him or her is being lost. So the doctor is sort of becoming a willing pawn in a game, Because first of all, we have to advise a procedure if it is indicated. If I'm advising a procedure, if I'm using an implant, I should be knowing everything about the implant. But if my independent thought process is being clouded by the fact that I am trained by the pharma industry and the equipment industry, all my information, all my conferences are basically run by them. There is no independent thinking, and that's, I think, the problem. And that is another thing that this report comes out with. And you know, the penetration of the industry in education, in conferences, I think it's a big problem.
Well, Dr. Agarwal, I see your hand go up. Go ahead, please, and then I'll bring in the rest of my panel. Dr. Agarwal.
I just want to add is that when I was the member of Delhi Medical Council, we had a case which was a case of stenting. And the case was the patient said, I was not informed about the types of stents available, their efficacies, their differences. And our judgment was in favor of the patient. Know that today, when you are talking about stenting, you can't just say that use this stent. You need to give options to the patient. You need to discuss about so there has to be an informed decision about every device. And the same thing will be true for knee devices and other devices. The time has come today where the patient has to be explained about harm reduction, about the efficacy. And if you say that I'm choosing this particular device, you have to explain to the patient, inform the patient, and he has to choose. He has to be, this is called as a shared decision making. Today, doctors are no more required to take a decision. It has to be a shared decision between the doctor and the patient.
Right. Malini Asola joins us as well with the All India Drugs Network. She was the one who fought on the prices of stents. Malini, how desperately do we need regulation, or how desperately do we need the government to take this seriously at this point?
I mean, I think we've been aware that there is a very severe lack of regulation, but I think that this particular series of stories is explosive because we haven't really seen this kind of evidence, hard evidence before. And, you know, as somebody who's been working on these issues, it was still, for me, very shocking to be reading these stories. And I think that there's a lot more material that we'll come to see. But basically, I think what we're finding out very clearly is that there is inadequate testing of these devices. We have an assumption in India that we can depend, so the regulator is relying on so-called regulated markets to be able to approve devices in India and waiving therefore the clinical investigations that would normally be required. And this investigation is basically telling us that that's just not good enough, because even the regulatory systems in countries like the US, in the UK, in other countries in the EU, in Australia are very weak as well. So I think there's no doubt about the need for further regulation.
Tina Sharma, spokesperson of the BJP, is there a reluctance
to something?
Yes. Yeah. All right. Go ahead, please. Ritu Sareen, go ahead.
Yeah. What I was saying, I just want to add to what Manini was saying, and that is, you know, since this is a global story, a very important focus of the story was on medical device and implant recalls and alerts. So what we have put out today, the story we have put out today is on adverse events, which is really the first stage to warn you or to have your red flags up on the fact that a device could or has gone wrong. You know, and if you know internationally, like in the US, you have the MOD data. Several other countries have data on adverse events. In India, we have nothing. So the CDSCO on a website which was active till about 2 months ago, which is when we were doing our story, had 13 adverse event reports over a period of 4-5 years of a country of this size. 13 adverse event reports. And that was a majority of those also were of FDA international recalled products, internationally recalled devices. Now, they've changed their website even as we did our story. And on the new website, at least till now, we haven't found any adverse events going up. On the other hand, you have the Indian Pharmacopoeia Commission, which is now collating and collecting these adverse event reports. And that is the investigation we have done today. They have got about 550 adverse event reports, and there's a very clear pattern that they reveal. Now, the question is, should these reports be made public? should the public be made aware of the fact that these repetitive adverse event reports are coming in, maybe on stents, on IUDs, or on hip implants?
I would say the answer is yes.
Well, if you look at the regulatory process in other countries, you take the MHRA in the UK, for example, they are expecting that anybody who supplies any drugs in that market will provide vigilance data on that drug from every other market as well. So it doesn't matter that adverse event occurred in India, it still has to be reported in the UK. So they're expecting a global compendium of adverse events to be reported to them.
Yes.
We haven't even gone to reporting it for Indian patients in India.
In fact, the Johnson & Johnson case particularly that you are talking about, that you've been through, this was a product that had been recalled, and it was, nobody was using it around the world, but we continued to implant it into our patients here in India. And this is one of the problems, that information didn't travel to the customer, or didn't travel to the patients and the doctors, whoever needed to know in India.
I think that brings to question, how do we regulate doctors? How do we regulate the whole supply chain of these implants? Do we need to regulate doctors by saying only certain doctors can use these implants?
See, otherwise also it is a very specific a field. Not every orthopedic surgeon would do these kind of replacements. There is a specialized training which is required, and based on that only you go ahead and do the surgeries. But here, what is the kind of regulations we have? Who's operating? It's
let me just ask this question of Tina Sharma, who is the spokesperson of the BJP. Ms. Sharma, is there a sort of reluctance to bring in this regulation for some reason, or has the government just not been able to? What is the problem? Why don't we have regulations in these devices?
I don't think there should be any problem for any government for that matter, because it's directly, indirectly, it is related to human life, and human life is important for any country. So I don't think any government should take single minute to decide on regulatory and single minute to decide on regulation coming in the country for these kind of implants which are being imported from other countries. I think any government shouldn't be playing with human life. And these are important implants, and these are important tools which we are getting in the country, and it is being fitted in the in humans' body. So I think it's very, very important to have a regulatory and a proper foolproof
Ms. Sharma, I agree with you.
To introduce such kind of
but is there a reason why we don't have it yet?
Yes. Can you come again?
I said I agree with you that every government must take this seriously, but is there a reason why we don't have these regulations? The current government has not been able to pass a bill. We don't have strong enough regulations, as every member of the panel has said so far. Why is that?
I think this report will make NDA government, make compulsory regulations in the bill, and I think it's all the more reason that Indian Express has published this report today, and government should wake up.
No, Tina Sharma, I'm sorry, you can't possibly tell me that the government is waiting for some journalist or for a group of journalists to write about it. This is your job. I mean, we have people. I have to tell you quite honestly, the phone lines are going completely crazy. People are calling in with problems that they have faced. So the response that the government was waiting for someone to write about it in the media, I'll also point out that people have been writing about this in the media for a while now. We've talked about it on the channel as well. So I reject that response. With all due respect, Tina Sharma, that response is not good enough. Jennifer on the phone line, Hitesh Joshi, I beg your pardon, on the phone line from Mumbai, a victim of a faulty hip implant, I understand. Hitesh, go ahead. Hitesh, if you can hear me, go ahead, please. All right, we don't seem to have that connection, and I'll come back to that. But as a victim, Vijay, I'm sorry I have to call you that, but what's your response to the argument that Tina Sharma put forward?
No, I don't agree with what Tina Sharma ji is saying, and there's been enough of attempts from the media. In fact, somewhat what work has been done is only by the media. From 2010 or till today, whatever is happening only on the media front. What is government doing on this front? After persuasion of this matter for 6 years, government has established an expert committee and which took almost 18 months to give any statements or the facts. The findings are not to an extent where you will go ahead and say, okay, this is the kind of a report we were looking for. I'm sorry, I beg to differ with what. And most of the times, the quality of implants, which I would just deviate for a second, the quality of implant which are expected in India are usually a second graded, right, Murli?
So actually, I want to ask this question. If any, I want to. I read that there's second hand or previously used. Could someone explain to me what a second hand? Sorry, what a second hand implant is? Dr. Agarwal, do you want to take a stab at that? Would you explain to us what a second hand or a previously used implant is?
Can I please interrupt?
See, one is that when you talk about disposables, say specifically when it comes to catheters, some people use catheters again after ethylene oxide sterilization. These are called reusable. People use the term New York versus Oxford. Oxford means something which is reused. New York means a new catheter. This practice has been there in cardiology, but most of these catheters are a single-time use. So anything which is being reused without the permission of the patient or without an informed consent is not correct and it is unethical. But yes, sometimes in cardiology practice specifically, catheters are being reused. Some of the countries has been using pacemakers as a reuse after sterilization, but selling anything which is reusable without patient consent is unethical and illegal.
How often does this happen in India?
Well, I think the Indian Express report very clearly says that there is no regulation, even of, I think breast implant was a good example of it. It's not just imported. If you don't regulate it, there is a domestic market,
Yes.
there are domestic manufacturers, and if they're not regulated, you're going to find a lot of them. And if they're going to be performing operations in DDA flats, then clearly you're going to have reuse, you're going to have bad quality, unregulated doctors, all of it.
Particularly in this case, because there's no way for a patient to know what has been used.
Absolutely not.
You have no clue what has been used. So there has to be regulation.
Elsewhere in the world, there is an item code which is unique to the product for all implants. The IPC now says, the Pharmacopoeia Conference now says that they will try and implement it from 22.
Yes.
And that's only a draft. It's there in the rest of the world.
Happens,
you don't
what
need,
happens till then? Yes.
4 years to figure out that each item needs a code. It's not magic. It's not hard to do. And yet we don't want to do it here. So you don't want to identify the product clearly. You don't want to check the supply chain.
So let me just, and this, what Dr. Agarwal just explained to us about reusing implants, where basically an implant that has been in somebody else's body, that is cleaned, sterilized, one hopes, and then reused in another patient, while that patient doesn't know. So you don't know technically if the implant that's been put inside you is new. Or second hand. That's really scary. Jennifer on the phone line from Mumbai. Jennifer, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. Is that adverse events is generally the doctor seems to explain to the patient, the consequences of whatever is being put into your body, if I'm not wrong. Yes. And where means how much, whose responsibility is it? Is it the company who is responsible if something goes wrong? Or is it is it the government who is obliged, who takes this responsibility?
Well, who takes the responsibility? Right now, no one.
With drugs, it's quite straightforward, which is that anybody who is aware of any incident is bound to report it. So it doesn't matter if you're a security guard in a pharmaceutical company and you hear about it from your neighbor, that something has happened, you're bound to report it. And globally, all of this data is kept in one place and shared with all regulators, except in India, of course. There is a requirement to have good pharmacovigilance. Same thing should apply to devices. So everybody who's aware, it's not just the doctor, patients can call in and say, this is my experience, and companies are bound to record it. So if you take global best practice, it is that anybody can report pharmacovigilance.
But as of now, no one actually takes responsibility, like which
No one, practically no one.
Ritesh Joshi on the phone line from Mumbai. Ritesh, go ahead, please. Hitesh,
Hello?
I beg your pardon. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm the victim of this ASR hemp implant. And once whenever these recalls and tests are done, I always have a fears and agony that what will be happen. And due to this, my life is totally miserable. So I want to know whom we have to contact and how we can do this.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, who do you have to contact? And I want to just open this up to the entire panel. Anyone who wants to jump in and answer. Dr. Sanjay Nagral, what do patients do when they find themselves, when they're still in pain after the surgery and they don't know who to go to, they don't know what to do?
So I think it's very simple. The patient contacts his or her doctor first. It is primarily the doctor's responsibility to look into what's happening. And I must say this, that we just to go back to the issue you raised about reuse, and so I don't know what you mean by second hand, but reuse is a little complex issue.
Okay.
Sometimes reuse there is an attempt, I must say this, by doctors to cut down costs by reusing material. And in fact, in the rest of the world now, people are reusing material, but under a certain specific condition. The problem here is that it is not done perhaps in the right way. It is not transparent. But reuse can cut costs. I'm not talking about implants. I'm talking of catheters. But it needs to be done in an organized way. And coming back to the larger issue, Faye, see that the companies are seeing a market in India. And obviously, this is going to worsen because there's a competition. Who are the gatekeepers? The gatekeepers on one hand is the state, but on the other hand is the medical profession, and I think their associations. So I think these are the people who need to be the gatekeepers to ensure that their patients come about, their loyalty to either their institutions they work in or their connections with the industry. I think we need to be very clear that it is our patients who come first, and a lot of these things can be stopped.
Yes, Dr. Agarwal, I saw your hand go up as well. Please go ahead.
I want to talk about two things. One was when we use the word, there is also a terminology called expired disposable or an expired device. Suppose it has taken off its shelf life, and some international companies will try to sell a month before that because they know that this is not going to be sold in the market. And sometimes you can label them as a second hand because they are expired and they are re-sterilized or they are repacked and given to the community. That's one. Number two, I just want to clarify is that when I was in IMA National President, we started the PVPI department at IMA. And under the pharmacovigilance program, it includes the devices, it includes the disposables. So every device is, if a patient finds it is a malfunctioning, he can go to his doctor, inform the PVPI number. 1-800 number is available of PVPI, and you can ask the helpline number that has anybody else reported the same types of complaints. So that PVPI can tell you, even the patient and the doctors, whether similar complaints are coming or not with the same device or not. So everybody, that basically gives you that whether it is a drug effect or an adverse event. And if you are finding multiple drug adverse event, that may be the first time you may be able to get an information that this particular device is not working in multiple patients. So PVPI should be advertised by the government at every level, and every doctor and every patient should know that such type of a helpline exists.
But, Murli?
It exists,
Hey,
but it doesn't really work if no one's using it, right?
Yes.
The J&J saga tells us that how many people actually called the helpline, how effective was the helpline, how many doctors knew, how many doctors implanted after a global recall, after it was recalled in Australia.
I think
we have a story here.
The worst part of the J&J story was the fact that the company turned around and said, I can't reach everyone who has my implant because not all of them, we don't have records, addresses, phone numbers, people have changed houses. We can't reach every one of us. So it's actually as basic as, if we were to discover that there's a problem with a certain type of implant in this country right now, we don't even have one centralized record of every patient who has that device in their body to be able to track that person down and say, hey, listen, we have a problem.
Correct. And that's a small number we're talking about. You know, if you think of other implants, this was 10,000 implants. We're talking about other implants which are going to be in lakhs. So you're talking about stents, for example.
Yes.
We're not talking about a few thousand. We're talking about large numbers here. So the only way it will work is if doctors are held responsible for it. So in every implant, including the J&J story, the doctors knew they were implanting that product. So if they were responsible for tracking it and they were responsible for the recall, then frankly, that's the missing link in this whole exercise.
I know Malini wanted to jump in with something. Malini, go ahead.
So I think in relation to what we were talking about earlier, I'm not quite sure what you mean by second-hand devices, but certainly this ICIJ investigation has also revealed that many companies are at a very fast pace introducing new models, and these are not necessarily better tested models, but they're just slight differences, slight minor changes of previous models, and there may be I would say it's very high likelihood that the older models are really being dumped on developing countries with poor regulatory systems. So you might have products that in regulated markets or in the developed countries have already been proven to be faulty, but they are actually being dumped on India. With regards to the adverse event reporting, this is actually the discussion we're having is actually about, there are actually regulations in place. There are conditions on the basis of which these companies are getting licenses. We're talking about violations of those rules, of those laws. So in the instance of Johnson & Johnson, they were meant to report all these adverse events to the regulator. They're meant to retain these records. They're supposed to inform the regulator about other adverse events that have taken place across the world. But this has not happened. So these are actually violations. The problem here is that the regulator is reluctant to take any action, has decided that they will, and this is not just in the case of one company, but clearly this is happening across the board. The regulator is refusing to really look into collection of this evidence, to analyze it, and then take action. And worst of all is that none of this is being done transparently, so the public is not aware of what devices are associated with what number of adverse events, the seriousness of these events, and therefore they don't have any information, objective information, to be able to be informed about whether the implants that they have are faulty, or whether they should go to their doctor and have them monitored.
Ritu Sareen, is the fundamental problem here in India the lack of information to patients and customers who come to doctors? Because like is being pointed out by other members of the panel, patients are just not told anything.
Like I met one doctor who was doing breast implantation, and he said, in my decades of practice, I had one patient only one patient in years who asked me for my medical degree. And I said, you are the first person who's asked me for my degree, and I'm going to give you a 50% discount. No, the point is not that. There are several people we spoke to across the stories we've done who said that it's time the doctors also came forward. There is a clear reluctance of members of the medical fraternity to come forward because they think it might implicate them too. That's one. And two, that they have nothing to gain if, say, they file an adverse event report. So there's a huge onus and responsibility on the medical fraternity to come forward and, at least at the first stage, go ahead and fill those forms that are now being brought out by the IPC called adverse event forms.
But we have a couple of people on the phone line right now. Narendra is on the phone line from Bangalore. Narendra, go ahead.
Good evening, madam.
Good evening.
Indeed, I was feeling very happy bringing in this channel about the hospitals and the doctors. I feel so sorry. 4 years back, when I had to undergo for a heart surgery, the stent was costing around 6 lakhs for 2 stents. And today, I appreciate Mr. Modi to reduce it to 20,000 rupees. If the hospitals are cheating in this way,
Yes.
how should the people survive in India?
Yes, I must point out to you, Mr. Narendra, that on the panel today we have Malini Aisola, who fought a battle over several years to bring down the prices of stents and to regulate the prices of stents. It was not a overnight decision by any government. So while there is, the credit could be shared by any number of people, we must acknowledge the people who really fought that battle. Amar on the phone line from Bangalore. Amar, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. It's been just my question to the panelist from the Indian Express, Dr.
Yes, Ritu.
Right?
Ritu
So
Sareen. Yes, go ahead.
I've been a diabetic patient for last 20 years, right? And I keep myself well, like exercises and all. But surprisingly, whenever I visit a doctor after every 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, the doctors keep on changing the medicine. They keep on forcing us to take the different brands. If I'm using 3 months back something else, and suddenly that used to it, now suddenly the doctors change, you take this one. So I don't understand. And whenever, as a practically, if you see also, it's very...
Okay, so you want to know why the doctors keep changing your medication around. Is there something you should know about that? Dr. Sanjay Nagral, do you want to answer that question?
Well, so there are many reasons why doctors change brands. It could sometimes be a genuine reason. But, I've been saying this, that it is true and it is an open secret that the influence of the pharma industry and now the devices industry on the medical profession all over the world, but also in India, is huge. And the problem here is that we are not even talking about it. In the rest of the world, I guess there is some discussion, there is some attempt to put some regulations in place. Having said that, I'm not sure whether in this particular case the change of brand is. There can be genuine reasons also. So I think we are going back to the same thing again and again. That I think in all this there is, of course, the companies, there is a market, but the profession's role, I think, is critical, because if we just have remind us that it is our patient who comes first, a lot of things fall into place very logically.
Right, and Dr. Agarwal, I want you to also respond to the previous comment that was made by one of the panelists saying doctors are reluctant to come forward with the information that you have about how the devices industry or the pharma industry might be treating patients. Is it true that doctors refuse to come forward, or are doctors hand in glove? Why aren't there any whistleblowers from the medical fraternity?
See, nowadays when we talk about newer regulations and we talk about NABH accreditation, we talk about JCI accreditation, adverse reportings now is becoming a must. More and more hospitals now, no Mediclaim reimbursement is going to happen unless you are entry-level NABH accreditation. So these things are changing. Maybe in the past that people were not reporting, but now reporting adverse events is going to be a must under the whether it is entry-level NABH or NABH accreditation.
No, but that was not specifically my question. My question was this. We keep waiting for the media to talk about these things, for the media to report these things, but the truth is the only people who really know what's happening on both ends, one is the supplier and the manufacturer, the other is the patient, is the doctor or the medical fraternity. We haven't had enough whistleblowers, we haven't had enough doctors come forward and say, hey, this is wrong, this should be stopped.
They will never do that.
Why not? My question is, why not?
I still feel I agree with all of you. In the interest of the patient, it is a duty of the doctors if they find anything is defective, and that is the role of PVPI. The role of PVPI is to inform and when you inform to the PVPI, the first thing they ask is, give us the name of the company, give us the brand name, and give us the name of the number, the serial number, so that they can trace if the similar problems are coming with multiple things or not.
We don't have serial numbers on implants, but go ahead, Vijay.
See what Dr. Agarwal is saying, and I just wanted to say why everything is dependent on somebody else. Where is your own concise? Why your own heart doesn't go out on all these issues? Why are you not behaving as a normal human beings? Why do you feel like, superhuman beings? If you are a doctor, you are not doing a great. Definitely, you have to be acknowledged. The due respect has to be given. But then why do you expect every time some third person to come and raise the concerns and then you stay back?
Actually, Vijay, the other question that I must place before you before we run out of time is that in the Johnson & Johnson case particularly, you and the other victims who found each other, you've approached now the health ministry of the government of India.
Yes.
Has the, now that you've brought it to the attention of the health ministry, have things changed?
I don't think so. Even now also we've been writing it to them. There are a lot of phone calls I'm making. I'm calling up the health secretary. I called up health minister. I called up all the leading spokesperson of the ruling government. Nobody is able to find the kind of a God which we are looking out.
Are we looking for God or just looking for regulation, Ritu Sari?
Maybe we'll talk again about the subject after a few days once we are done.
All right, I'm going to leave it here because obviously there is a lot going on in the healthcare industry, like we keep pointing out. And like we've brought you stories in the past, we promise on this channel to prioritize the healthcare industry over other points of discussion. So, for example, if you were to ask me as the editor of Mirror Now, do I find this story worrying, or should we be talking about, say, mandirs? For example, I'd rather talk about implants because, like our representative from the government said, directly or indirectly affects human life, but it technically implants go into your body. It couldn't be a more direct impact than that. And if we currently have a massive industry that's worth $5 billion, you can take it for granted. It's not like the government hasn't realized it needs regulation. It's too big to have gone unnoticed. The government knows it needs regulation. It's just not being regulated well enough. It's up to us citizens really to put pressure to make sure that this regulation comes about as quickly as possible, and that the regulation is not what it is today, which is so complicated that no ordinary layperson can even understand what it means. It has to put the patient first. Thanks for watching.